So the first thing we're going to cover about polygamy is, do Mormons still practice polygamy? No. If you are in good standing with the Mormon religion, you are not a polygamist. Does that mean that people don't practice polygamy at all? No way, because have you ever seen the show Sister Wives? That's a TLC one. If you haven't watched it, it's kind of interesting if that's interesting. I will talk about that a couple of times just because of some stuff that we'll talk about when it comes to statehood. Okay, so yes, there are definitely people who still practice polygamy. A lot of them are spin-off religions off of the LDS Church. There's one really famous one. They were involved in Utah, so you might have heard about him, from the FLDS religion. So that's where a lot of people get confused. They used to practice polygamy. The FLDS practiced polygamy, so the LDS still practice polygamy because it's the same thing, right? Okay, not the same thing, but there are definitely still people out there who practice polygamy. Is polygamy illegal? In the state of Utah, yes. In order for Utah to become a state, they had to put in their state constitution that they would never practice polygamy. So that is why it is illegal in Utah. There's actually not a lot of states that have that as a written out law, but one of the big fights back in the day was to fight slavery and to fight its twin in evilness, polygamy. So it's very hated at the time. It makes it, just to kind of put it simple in an easy way for us to think about it, it's just really weird, guys. It's really weird. Imagine having that kind of a family dynamic. It's just weird. A lot of things are different. A lot of things are, I don't know, really odd to try and explain, right? So we're just going to think of it as weird. Outsiders thought about it as really weird, like creepy weird. And you have to realize that they're 1,200 miles away from any cities on the East Coast, okay? So Mississippi River is about 1,200 miles away from them. So people aren't getting news fast. There's no such thing as phones at this point. And so it's just like these really weird people who went out in the middle of nowhere in a desert and they're marrying any woman that they can find. It's weird. And I'm making it a big deal because it is a big deal to Utah history. So hang tight with that. Okay, when we first came out here, we as in collective Utahns, because we live here in Utah, when these people get here to Utah, they want to become a state. By becoming a state, all of a sudden you get to pick your own leaders, you get to get all sorts of rewards that we'll talk about in a couple of days, next week probably. And when we do that, when we talk about it, we'll talk about the benefits of it. But I want to show you what they want to become their state. This is the proposed state of Deseret. I want you to know what Deseret means. Deseret really literally translates to honeybee. Most of the time I would point out my beautiful state map that I have hanging on, or state flag that I have on my wall, but you guys can just Google it. The state flag of Utah has a honeybee on it. So the honeybee hive stands for industry, and Deseret means honeybee. Honeybees consistently work and work and work. Even if you take all their honey, they rebuild and they keep going and they keep going. So they really identify with that because they've had to do that multiple times. So they want to name the state Deseret. This is what they propose. I want you to take a good look at that and tell me what's wrong with it. What's wrong with that? Maybe why would that not become the size of our state? It's massive! You guys, this is massive. It includes some of Oregon, California, Nevada, Arizona, Idaho, Utah, Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico. That is 9 states that are inside of this one state. And notice, there in California, it actually includes where San Diego is, clear down to the ocean. Would that be awesome to have an ocean port in our state? Heck yes, it'd be awesome. And it would make it really easy for people to get to Utah if they could just jump on a boat and get off the boat and be here. So that's what they want. Obviously, that's not going to become an actual thing, but in order to become a state, you have to first become a territory. Once you become a territory and you take all the necessary steps, then you can become a state. So when you are a territory, you're kind of like a trial run for a state. So you get to do a lot of the things the states get to do, just at a lesser extent. So when Utah becomes a territory, we get a lot of things, but we also don't get full power. So before we go about all of the things that the territory gives us, I want to point out that there is still territories of the United States today. So Puerto Rico is a territory. Guam is a territory. There's a whole list of places in the world that are territories of the United States. If they chose to go through the rest of the steps, they could become a state. We could have more states added to our country. Isn't that kind of crazy to think about? And very hard for my brain to try and imagine a flag with 51 stars because it just would not be as pretty. It's fine. If they chose to, that would be awesome. Okay, so first things first, we only become a territory because of this big grand thing that I want you to write down and make sure that you know about. It's called the Compromise of 1850. I don't have a slide here that shows it because typically I have you do a whole assignment on just this compromise because it's a big deal. We don't have time for that, so I'm just going to tell you the highlighted version. The Compromise of 1850 is what makes California a state. Once California becomes a state, Utah and Nevada become territories. So we become a territory of it. So we become a territory, California becomes a state. That's what I want you to know. The reason they don't do it different, why we can't become a state first, really at this point has to do with slavery. We have not had the Civil War at this point. So slavery is a big issue. This is right before, we're like in the last couple of years leading up to the Civil War. And so things are really getting heated. When we're talking about slavery, we're talking about the North versus the South as far as the actual act of slavery. Why this is a big deal and why California even matters is because of power. So you have to think in Congress, when people are making laws in Washington, D.C., right now there's an equal number of slave states and non-slave states. So can the slavery states pass a ton of laws that's going to make slavery absolutely legal and not a big deal? No, because there's an equal number who will block it, who are against slavery, and vice versa. So if all of a sudden we get California and Utah and whatever other states pop in and they're all either slavery or non-slavery states, so slave or no slave states, is that going to tilt the power in Washington? Absolutely. Is that going to tip the tides for this looming Civil War? Absolutely. So that's the problem, is we're just before the Civil War and we're trying to maintain this balance of power to prevent war because everyone can kind of feel it coming. Okay, when we become a territory, we get a state capital. What's our state capital? I hope you all just said Salt Lake City. That's not our first state capital though. Keep in mind, we are talking about going to a state that's this size. And where would be a good capital for this? So Salt Lake City, let's see, hopefully you guys can see my mouse, is like right here, right? Salt Lake. That's not going to be very central in this huge, massive state. So they picked a place called Fillmore, which is just a little bit farther down. So Fillmore is over here. Fillmore is definitely more central. If you guys have been to St. George, you've passed Fillmore. It's a little town on the side of the road. If you blink, you miss it. That was our state's first capital. Make sure you know that. Fillmore is our state's first capital. So it's the territory's capital, but the first one. The first governor of Utah is Brigham Young. And I know a lot of you will say, well, what about the separation between church and state? This is going to be a problem that we're going to talk about. And there's a reason why Brigham Young is the first and only governor of Utah that's also the president of the church. we'll talk about it when we talk about the Utah War. It's really nothing that Brigham Young did bad, but it's a lot of perceptions. So while I'm on that note, we always talk about this later on, but I just want to make sure that we talk about it. Is it okay for a governor of the state to be Mormon today? Absolutely it is. You can be whatever religion you want and be in an elected position. The difference is, can you be the head of the Mormon church and also the governor? No, that's where you can't do that. So if you're the head of one and the head of the other, definite issue. That's where you need that separation, because would that person do what's best for the church or do what's best for the state? Because you have to have someone who's willing to do the best for their job title. So there is that. We are going to, so make sure you do that little quiz. We're going to move on. You'll have 2 days to do this before we start talking about the gold rush and then all of the fun advances that happen. We'll go through those really quick. If you have any questions, as always, email me. If not, have fun, be safe, and make sure to go check out those challenge activities.